June 6, 1944. 6:30 in the morning. The largest amphibious invasion in human history is underway. Over 156,000 Allied troops are storming 5 beaches along the Normandy coast. The fate of Europe hangs in the balance. Victory or catastrophe, no one knows which yet. Back in England, commanders wait in agony. Radio silence blankets the operation. Any transmission could give away troop positions. German listening posts scan every frequency. The world's most powerful military force has just thrown itself against Hitler's Atlantic Wall, and for hours, the Allied High Command sits in darkness. They need confirmation. They need to know if the invasion is succeeding, or if thousands of young men are dying on the sand for nothing. But one messenger is already in the air. A small bird with blue-gray feathers and keen eyes. His name is Paddy. He's an Irish pigeon hatched in County Armagh, trained by the Royal Air Force, and at this moment, he's flying for his life across the English Channel with the most important message of the war strapped to his leg. This is not a legend. This is not a myth embellished by time. This is the verified, documented story of Paddy, the fastest pigeon of World War II, the bird who carried the first confirmation of D-Day's success, and who flew into history at a speed no other pigeon could match. Before we understand what Paddy did, we need to understand why he was there at all. In 1944, pigeons were not romantic relics of the past. They were cutting-edge military technology. Radio could be jammed. Codes could be broken. Messengers could be captured. But a pigeon released into the sky, flying by instinct across hundreds of miles of enemy territory, that was a communication method the Germans couldn't stop. The British military had been using pigeons since World War I, but by the Second World War, the system had become extraordinarily sophisticated. The National Pigeon Service was established in 1939, and within months, pigeon lofts were set up across England. Civilians donated their racing pigeons. Breeders offered their best stock. By 1944, over 200,000 pigeons were serving in the British Armed Forces. These were not ordinary birds. They were athletes bred for speed and endurance, trained to fly in all weather, capable of navigating by the sun and the Earth's magnetic field. A good military pigeon could fly at speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour and cover distances of over 500 miles without rest. They could fly through storms, through flak, through gunfire. And they rarely failed. Paddy was one of the best. He was hatched in 1943 in Carnlough, County Antrim, in Northern Ireland, from a line of champion racing pigeons. His early training showed exceptional promise. He was fast, remarkably fast, and he had an unerring sense of direction. When the RAF began selecting pigeons for the D-Day operation, Paddy was among those chosen. He was assigned to the 21st Army Group, under the command of General Bernard Montgomery, and he was transported to southern England in the weeks leading up to the invasion. The plan was simple but perilous. Pigeons would be carried with the assault forces, packed into waterproof containers, loaded onto landing craft, and brought ashore with the first waves of troops. Once the beachhead was secured, messages would be written, placed in small aluminum capsules, and attached to the pigeons' legs. The birds would then be released to fly back across the channel to their home lofts in England, where intelligence officers would be waiting to retrieve and decode the messages. It sounds straightforward, but consider what these pigeons faced. The channel was 100 miles wide at its narrowest point, but the invasion routes were longer, some over 200 miles. The pigeons would be flying over open water with no landmarks to guide them, in weather that could change in minutes, through smoke from bombardments, past German fighters and flak batteries, over a battlefield where the sky itself was full of metal and fire. And they had to do it fast. Every minute mattered. The longer the commanders in England waited without word, the more uncertain they became. Uncertainty bred hesitation. Hesitation could cost lives. Paddy was assigned to a unit landing on Sword Beach, the easternmost of the 5 invasion beaches near the town of Ouistreham. His handler was a young corporal from the Royal Corps of Signals, a man trained in pigeon care and message handling, who understood that the bird he carried might be more valuable than any radio in the field. In the early morning hours of June 6th, as the landing craft plowed through the rough seas toward the French coast, Paddy waited in his container. The sound of naval gunfire shook the air. Bombers roared overhead. The sea was churning, the sky gray and uncertain. Around him, men vomited from seasickness and fear. But Paddy, like all military pigeons, remained calm. They were bred for this, bred to stay steady in chaos. The landing craft hit the beach at 7:25 a.m. The ramp dropped. Men poured out into waist-deep water, bullets cutting the air around them. Some fell immediately. Others scrambled toward the beach, dragging equipment, firing back, screaming orders. It was hell, a hell of noise and smoke and blood. But within the first hour, the British forces on Sword Beach had secured a foothold. Casualties were heavy, but the defenses were cracking. Engineers blew gaps in the beach obstacles. Tanks rolled forward. The beachhead was holding. By 8 a.m., a message was drafted. It was brief, coded, urgent. Beach secured. Casualties moderate. Advancing inland. The corporal found Paddy, removed him carefully from a container, checked him for injuries, none, and attached the message capsule to his leg. He held the bird up to the gray sky, felt the strong heartbeat under the feathers, and then opened his hands. Paddy launched into the air. The moment Paddy took flight, he was alone. There was no flock to follow, no other birds to guide him. Just instinct training and an internal compass that humans still don't fully understand. He circled once, getting his bearings, and then turned northwest, toward home. The English Channel stretched out below him, a vast expanse of gray-green water churned white by thousands of ships. Destroyers, battleships, landing craft, minesweepers, an armada that filled the sea from horizon to horizon. Above them, the sky was crowded with aircraft. Fighters, bombers, transport planes, gliders. The air was thick with smoke, with the smell of cordite, with the roar of engines. Paddy flew through it all. At an altitude of around 2,000 feet, he found a tailwind, a stroke of luck that would prove crucial, and he pushed himself to maximum speed. His wings beat in a rhythm honed by thousands of generations of breeding and evolution. His heart, no bigger than a walnut, pumped with the efficiency of a finely tuned machine. His eyes, capable of seeing ultraviolet light, scanned the horizon for landmarks, for coastlines, for anything that could confirm his direction. Behind him, the battlefield receded. The beaches, the smoke, the thunder of war, all falling away. Ahead, nothing but sky and water. And somewhere beyond the horizon, 230 miles away, was his loft, his home, the place his instincts were screaming at him to reach. Back on Sword Beach, the corporal watched until Paddy was a speck, then nothing. He didn't know if the bird would make it. He didn't know if German fighters would spot him, if a storm would blow him off course, if exhaustion would drag him into the sea. All he could do was hope. Hope that this one small bird, weighing less than a pound, could do what radios could not. Meanwhile, in England, at RAF Herne in Dorset, pigeon handlers waited. The loft where Paddy had been trained was ready. Intelligence officers stood by with decoding materials. Everyone knew that pigeons would be coming back from Normandy, but no one knew when or how many or what they would say. The first hours after the invasion began were agonizing. Some news trickled in through naval communications, but it was fragmentary, uncertain. Had the landings succeeded? Were troops advancing or pinned down? The planners had anticipated thousands of casualties in the first hours. They had prepared for failure, for retreat, for disaster. But they wouldn't know for certain until messages arrived. And the fastest way to get those messages was through the pigeons. Paddy flew. The wind was in his favor, but the distance was brutal. 230 miles might not sound like much in the age of aircraft, but for a bird flying on muscle power alone, it was an ordeal. Pigeons can maintain high speeds for hours, but fatigue is inevitable. Lactic acid builds in the muscles. Dehydration sets in. The risk of predators, hawks, falcons, is always present. But Paddy had advantages. He was young, at the peak of his physical condition. He had been fed a high-protein diet in the days before the mission. And he had something even more powerful: motivation. Homing pigeons don't fly home because they're trained to. They fly home because they must. It's a biological imperative, stronger than hunger, stronger than fear. The loft is safety, territory, mate, identity. A pigeon separated from its loft will fly until it drops dead to get back. Paddy flew with that relentless drive. Over the channel, the water below him was still crowded with ships, but as he flew northwest, the density decreased. He passed over minesweepers, over destroyers returning to England for more troops, over the occasional patrol boat. None of them noticed the small bird overhead. Why would they? In a sky filled with warplanes, one pigeon was invisible. By midday, Paddy had crossed the channel. The English coast came into view: white cliffs, green fields, the patchwork landscape of southern England. His speed had been extraordinary. Tailwinds had helped, but even accounting for that, he was flying faster than almost any other pigeon on record. His average speed over the entire journey would later be calculated at over 56 miles per hour, a rate that few pigeons ever achieve, especially over such a long distance and in such chaotic conditions. He adjusted his course slightly, using landmarks he recognized from training. The coastline, the shape of the fields, the position of the sun, all of it fed into his navigation. He was exhausted now, his muscles burning, his breathing labored, but the loft was close. So close. At RAF Herne, the handlers heard it first. A faint sound, familiar to anyone who works with pigeons, the whistle of wings cutting air. They looked up. A shape against the sky, moving fast, descending in a steep glide toward the loft. Someone shouted. Officers ran out. Binoculars were raised. And then Paddy landed. He hit the landing board, stumbled slightly from exhaustion, and walked into the loft. A handler scooped him up immediately, felt his rapid heartbeat, checked for injuries. Paddy was alive. Battered, exhausted, but alive. The message capsule was removed from his leg with careful hands. The tiny aluminum tube was opened. The paper inside was unfolded. The code was read. Beach secured. Casualties moderate. Advancing inland. The time was logged, 1:20 p.m., June 6, 1944. Paddy had flown from Normandy to England in 4 hours and 50 minutes. 230 miles. Through a war zone. Faster than any other pigeon dispatched that day. Faster than almost any pigeon in recorded history under combat conditions. The message was immediately passed to intelligence officers, decoded fully, and transmitted to Allied headquarters. It was not the only message to arrive that day. Other pigeons made it back, and radio communications eventually resumed, but it was the first confirmation that the invasion was succeeding. The first tangible proof that men were alive, advancing, holding the beaches. And it had come on the wings of an Irish pigeon who had just flown the race of his life. News of Paddy's flight spread quickly through military circles. Pigeon handlers, who often worked in obscurity, suddenly found their work in the spotlight. The bird who had beaten every other messenger on D-Day became a symbol of the unsung contributions that animals made to the war effort. But for Paddy himself, life returned to routine. He was given food, water, rest. His condition was monitored carefully. Within days, he was back to normal, ready to fly again if needed. But the military had other plans for him. Paddy's flight had not gone unnoticed at the highest levels. The People's Dispensary for Sick Animals, a British veterinary charity, had established the Dickin Medal in 1943 to recognize animals who displayed exceptional bravery in wartime. It was the animal equivalent of the Victoria Cross, the highest military honor in the British Armed Forces. By 1944, several pigeons had already received the medal, along with dogs and horses who had served with distinction. Paddy's case was reviewed. His flight time was verified. The distance was confirmed. The importance of the message was undeniable. In December 1944, 6 months after D-Day, the decision was made. Paddy would receive the Dickin Medal. The ceremony took place in London, at the PDSA headquarters. Paddy was brought in by his handler, calm and unbothered by the attention. Photographers were present. Military officers attended. The medal, a bronze medallion inscribed with the words "For Gallantry." And "We also serve" was attached to Paddy's chest by a ribbon. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters scribbled notes. The citation read, "For the fastest flight by a pigeon carrying a message from the Normandy operations, crossing the English Channel in exceptional time, and delivering intelligence of vital importance." Paddy stood still through it all, his dark eyes unblinking, his posture calm. He had no concept of what the medal meant, no understanding of the ceremony. He was a pigeon. His reward was simpler: food, safety, a loft to call home. After the ceremony, Paddy was retired from active service. The military had a policy of not risking decorated animals unnecessarily, and Paddy had already done more than enough. He was returned to Ireland, to the loft where he had been hatched, in Carnlough, County Antrim. His owner, Andrew Hughes, a pigeon fancier who had donated Paddy to the National Pigeon Service at the start of the war, welcomed him home. Hughes had followed Paddy's career closely, reading every report, clipping every newspaper article. Now his bird was back, a decorated war hero, alive and healthy. Paddy lived the rest of his life in that loft, surrounded by other pigeons, flying freely over the Irish countryside. He mated, raised young, participated in a few local races, though he was never again pushed to the extremes he had endured on D-Day. He became something of a local celebrity. Children visited the loft to see the famous pigeon. Newspapers ran follow-up stories. Veterans who had landed on Sword Beach wrote letters to Hughes, thanking him for raising the bird that had carried the news of their survival. There is something deeply moving about Paddy's post-war life. He was not kept in a museum, not paraded endlessly at events, not exploited for propaganda. He was allowed to simply be a pigeon, to live, to fly, to exist in peace. It was a dignity afforded to few war heroes, human or animal, and it speaks to the respect that Hughes and the military had for the creature who had served so bravely. Paddy died in 1954 at the age of 11, which is a respectable lifespan for a pigeon. He was buried in the garden of Hughes' home in Carnlough. No grand monument marked the spot, just a simple stone with his name and the dates of his life. But for those who knew the story, it was enough. The Dickin Medal he had earned remained with the Hughes family for decades. In later years, it was donated to a military museum in Northern Ireland, where it is displayed alongside other artifacts from the war. Visitors can see it there today, a small bronze disc, tarnished with age, representing a moment in history when everything depended on speed, courage, and the beating wings of a single bird. To understand the full significance of Paddy's achievement, we need to grasp what carrier pigeons meant to the Allied war effort. This was not a quaint tradition or a backup plan. Pigeons were a primary communication method, especially in situations where radio was compromised. Over 250,000 pigeons served in World War II across all Allied forces. They carried messages from resistance fighters in occupied Europe, from downed pilots behind enemy lines, from reconnaissance missions deep in enemy territory. They had a success rate of over 95%, far better than many electronic systems of the era. The speed and reliability of these birds saved countless lives. A message that arrived an hour earlier could mean the difference between a successful rescue and a massacre. Intelligence that reached headquarters a day sooner could alter battle plans, redirect resources, prevent disasters. Pigeons were not romantic symbols of the past. They were practical, effective, and often irreplaceable. Paddy's D-Day flight was the pinnacle of this service. Consider the stakes: the largest military operation in history, the future of Europe, the lives of tens of thousands of men, all hanging on the success or failure of a single day. And in those first crucial hours, when radio silence made commanders blind, it was pigeons like Paddy who gave them eyes. The fact that he did it faster than any other bird, under worse conditions, with more at stake, makes his flight one of the most remarkable feats of animal endurance and navigation in recorded history. He didn't just fly home. He flew home through a battlefield, through exhaustion, through fear, and he did it faster than almost any pigeon had ever done before. And yet, Paddy's story is not widely known. He does not appear in most popular histories of D-Day. His name is absent from the major documentaries, the blockbuster films, the commemorative speeches. He is a footnote, if he is mentioned at all. This is the fate of most animal war heroes. They serve, they sacrifice, they achieve extraordinary things, and then they are forgotten, their stories buried under the weight of human events. But their contributions were real. The messages Paddy and pigeons like him carried were not symbolic gestures. They were operational intelligence, life or death information, the raw data that commanders used to make decisions. Without them, the war would have been harder, longer, bloodier. The Dickin Medal, awarded to 32 pigeons during World War II, stands as recognition of this fact. Each medal tells a story of courage, endurance, and service. Each one represents a bird who flew when flying was nearly impossible, who carried messages when all other means had failed, who came home when coming home seemed like a miracle. Paddy's medal was the 15th awarded to a pigeon. But his flight time, 4 hours and 50 minutes over 230 miles, has never been beaten by any pigeon in similar combat conditions. It remains the fastest recorded flight by a carrier pigeon on a military operation during World War II. The science of pigeon navigation is still not fully understood. Researchers know that pigeons use multiple methods to find their way home: visual landmarks, the position of the sun, magnetic fields, even low-frequency sound waves that humans cannot hear. They have specialized cells in their beaks that detect magnetic fields, and their brains process spatial information in ways that far exceed human capabilities. But how they integrate all of this information, how they make split-second decisions in flight, how they maintain their sense of direction through storms and chaos, much of this remains mysterious. What we do know is that homing pigeons have been bred for this ability for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptians used them. Romans used them. Genghis Khan used them. By the 20th century, selective breeding had created birds with abilities that bordered on the miraculous. Paddy was the product of centuries of this breeding, combined with modern training methods, optimal nutrition, and a genetic lottery that gave him speed and endurance beyond the norm. He was, in every measurable way, an exceptional bird. But he was also just doing what pigeons do, flying home. The fact that his home was on the other side of a war zone, that getting there required flying faster than almost any bird had flown before, that the message he carried helped win the war, those were human concerns. For Paddy, it was simpler. There was a loft. He was not in the loft. Therefore, he flew. This simplicity is part of what makes animal war heroes so compelling. They don't fight for ideology. They don't understand nationalism or strategy or politics. They serve because they are loyal, because they are trained, because their instincts drive them to protect their handlers or return to their homes. Their bravery is pure, uncomplicated by the moral ambiguities that haunt human soldiers. And yet, their contributions are just as vital. The messages Paddy carried didn't know he was a bird. The commanders who read those messages didn't care that they had arrived on wings instead of wires. What mattered was the information, the speed, the reliability. Paddy delivered. That was enough. After the war, the National Pigeon Service was gradually disbanded. Advances in radio technology, the development of more reliable communication systems, and the end of large-scale conflict made carrier pigeons less necessary. By the 1950s, the military pigeon lofts were closed. The birds were returned to their owners or retired to civilian life. An era that had stretched back thousands of years was quietly ending. But the legacy of birds like Paddy endures. The Dickin Medal remains one of the most prestigious awards in animal history. Museums dedicated to military animals display the medals, tell the stories, preserve the memory of what these creatures achieved. Organizations like the PDSA continue to honor animals who serve, awarding medals to modern working dogs, horses, and other creatures who risk their lives alongside humans. And in Carnlough, in County Antrim, in a small garden where an old loft once stood, there is a stone. Most people who pass it don't know what it marks. But for those who do, it's a reminder of a day when the fate of the world hung in the balance, and a small bird with gray-blue feathers flew faster than any bird had flown before, carrying hope in a tiny aluminum capsule strapped to his leg. Paddy's story is not unique in its essentials. Thousands of pigeons flew dangerous missions during the war. Many died, many succeeded, many were never recognized. But Paddy's story is unique in its details, the speed, the distance, the timing, the significance of the message he carried. He was the fastest on most important day. That is a distinction that no amount of time can erase. The final question, perhaps, is why stories like Paddy's matter. Why should we care about a pigeon who flew across the English Channel 80 years ago? Why preserve these memories, these footnotes to larger histories? The answer is simple. Because they are true. Because they happened. Because the war was won not just by generals and soldiers, but by mechanics and cooks and medics and pigeons and dogs and horses, and all the countless beings who contributed, each in their own way, to the outcome. To forget them is to tell an incomplete story. To remember them is to honor the full scope of what was sacrificed and what was achieved. Paddy flew because he was trained to fly, because his instincts drove him to fly, because the loft was home and he had to get there. But in doing so, he became part of something larger than himself. He became part of history. His wings carried more than a message. They carried proof that even the smallest creatures can change the course of events, that courage comes in all forms, and that sometimes when everything else fails, the old ways, the simple ways, still work. On June 6, 1944, while thousands of men fought and died on the beaches of Normandy, a pigeon flew. He flew through smoke and chaos, over water and war, faster than almost any bird had flown before. And when he landed, exhausted and alive, in a loft in southern England, he brought with him the first word of victory. That is his story. That is his legacy. And it deserves to be remembered. What do you like about this animal? Tell me your favorite animal war story I should talk about next. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video.